The Sunday morning bells still ring across small-town America, their bronze voices echoing through streets that once bustled with families hurrying to worship. But something has changed. The parking lots that overflowed just decades ago now showcase islands of empty asphalt. Inside these sacred spaces, congregations that once packed every pew now cluster in the front rows, their voices barely filling sanctuaries built for hundreds. Welcome to Professor Archive, where we uncover the hidden currents shaping our world. What you're witnessing isn't just a temporary dip in church attendance, it's the most dramatic religious transformation in American history. In just 50 years, a nation that was once the beating heart of global Christianity has experienced an exodus so profound that experts are calling it a seismic shift in the very foundation of American identity. Before we dive into this fascinating story, I want you to be part of our community of history explorers. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the stories we uncover here might just change how you see the world. And here's something I'm genuinely curious about. Drop a comment telling me what time you're watching this and which city you're tuning in from. I love seeing our global community come together to explore these crucial moments in history. Now, let me tell you about Margaret Chen, a 28-year-old software engineer from Portland, Oregon. 3 years ago, Margaret made a decision that would have shocked her grandmother. She stopped going to church. Not because of a crisis of faith, not because of anger or disappointment, but simply because, as she puts it just stopped making sense in my life. Margaret's story isn't unique. It's the story of millions of Americans who have quietly walked away from the faith that once defined their families, their communities, and their nation. To understand the magnitude of what's happening, we need to travel back to 1957. Picture America at the height of its post-war confidence. Eisenhower in the White House, suburbs blooming like flowers across the landscape, and church attendance reaching an all-time high of 95%. Gallup polls showed that virtually every American identified with some form of Christianity. The phrase, "under God," had just been added to the Pledge of Allegiance, and ministers like Billy Graham drew crowds that would make modern rock stars envious. But hidden beneath this religious veneer, cracks were already forming. The very prosperity that seemed to validate American Christianity was quietly undermining its foundations. As families moved to suburbs, they left behind the tight-knit communities where faith had been reinforced daily through extended family, neighbors, and local institutions. In these new neighborhoods, church became just another activity competing with Little League, shopping, and the growing allure of television. The transformation began slowly, almost imperceptibly. In the 1960s, something extraordinary happened that religious leaders at the time barely recognized as significant. For the first time in American history, a generation came of age with access to higher education on a massive scale. The GI Bill had opened college doors to millions, and suddenly, young Americans were exposed to ideas, philosophies, and ways of thinking that their parents had never encountered. Dr. Sarah Williams, a sociology professor who grew up in rural Kentucky, recalls her grandfather's reaction when she announced her plans to study anthropology at the state university. "He looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes," she remembers. Not fear of the education itself, but fear of what he knew it might do to my faith. He'd seen it happen to other young people in our community. They'd go away to college as believers and come back as questioners. The questioning that began in university classrooms soon spread beyond campus borders. The civil rights movement forced many Americans to confront the uncomfortable reality that their churches had often been on the wrong side of justice. How could institutions that preached love and equality simultaneously practice segregation? Young people particularly began to see Christianity not as a force for social progress, but as an obstacle to it. Then came the cultural earthquake of the 1960s. The sexual revolution, the anti-war movement, the rise of feminism. All of these challenged traditional Christian teachings about morality, authority, and women's roles. For many Americans, especially the young, Christianity began to feel like a relic from a bygone era, increasingly out of step with modern values and scientific understanding. But perhaps nothing accelerated Christianity's decline in America like the scandals that began erupting in the 1980s and continue to this day. The fall of televangelists like Jim Bakker and Jimmy Swaggart in the late 1980s was just the beginning. These weren't just isolated incidents of hypocrisy. They revealed systemic problems that shook people's faith in religious institutions. Consider the story of Patricia Gonzalez, now 67, who was raised in a devout Catholic family in Boston. "I gave my life to that church," she says, her voice still carrying traces of pain decades later. "I taught Sunday school, organized charity drives, never missed Mass. But when the abuse scandals broke, and I learned that priests I knew, priests I trusted with my children, had been transferred quietly from parish to parish." Her voice trails off. "I couldn't reconcile that with a God of love and justice." Patricia's experience became the experience of millions. The Catholic abuse crisis, Protestant financial scandals, and the increasingly political rhetoric coming from many pulpits created what sociologists call institutional disillusionment. People didn't necessarily stop believing in God, but they stopped trusting the institutions that claimed to represent Him. Meanwhile, a quiet revolution was taking place in American homes. The rise of the internet meant that for the first time in history, ordinary people had access to information that had previously been controlled by religious authorities. Curious believers could now research the historical development of biblical texts, compare different religious traditions, and encounter perspectives that their local clergy might never have shared with them. Take the case of David Miller, a former evangelical pastor from Tennessee who spent 15 years leading a congregation of nearly 2,000 members. "The internet changed everything," he explains. "Suddenly, my congregation members were coming to me with questions I'd never been trained to answer. They'd read about textual criticism, about the Council of Nicaea, about the Dead Sea Scrolls. The simple faith I'd been taught to preach felt increasingly inadequate." David's struggle reflects a broader challenge facing American Christianity: the collision between traditional faith and modern knowledge. In previous generations, most Americans lived in what sociologists call plausibility structures, communities where religious beliefs were reinforced by everyone around them. But the internet shattered those structures, exposing believers to a vast marketplace of ideas and worldviews. The numbers tell a stark story. In 1990, 86% of Americans identified as Christian. By 2020, that number had dropped to just 65%. But even more dramatic is the rise of the knowns, Americans who claim no religious affiliation. This group, which barely registered in polls 50 years ago, now comprises nearly 30% of the population, making it the fastest growing religious category in America. Who exactly are these knowns? Contrary to popular assumption, they're not primarily angry atheists or rebellious teenagers. Many are well-educated, middle-class Americans who simply find traditional religious explanations insufficient for their experience of the world. They include people like Jennifer Park, a 34-year-old teacher from Denver who describes herself as spiritual but not religious. "I believe there's something greater than ourselves," Jennifer explains, "but I can't accept that any one religion has all the answers. I've studied Buddhism, read the Gospels, explored Native American spirituality. Why would I limit myself to one tradition when there's so much wisdom in the world?" Jennifer's perspective reflects another major factor in Christianity's decline: America's increasing religious diversity. Immigration from Asia, the Middle East, and other non-Christian regions has introduced millions of Americans to alternative spiritual traditions. Yoga studios now outnumber McDonald's restaurants in many American cities. Meditation apps have millions of users. Alternative spirituality isn't exotic anymore, it's mainstream. But perhaps the most significant factor in Christianity's decline is generational change. Baby boomers who came of age during the cultural upheavals of the 1960s maintained a complex relationship with faith, often critical of institutions but still personally spiritual. Generation X, raised during the height of the culture wars, became deeply skeptical of organized religion's political involvement. And millennials and Generation Z, they're the first American generations to be raised in a post-Christian cultural environment. Dr. Ryan Burge, a political scientist who studies American religion, puts it bluntly: "For young Americans today, Christianity isn't necessarily wrong or bad. It's just irrelevant. They've grown up in a world where religious belief is optional, where you can live a perfectly moral, meaningful life without ever setting foot in a church. For For their grandparents, that would have been unthinkable. The decline isn't uniform across all regions or demographics, however. The story of American Christianity is increasingly becoming a tale of two Americas: the secular Northeast and West Coast, where religious observance has declined precipitously, and the still religious South and rural areas, where faith remains a central organizing principle of life. This geographic divide has profound political implications. As Christianity has declined in America's major metropolitan areas, the engines of economic and cultural power, it has become increasingly associated with political conservatism and rural values. This association has accelerated the exodus of educated urban Americans from religious institutions, creating a feedback loop that further concentrates Christian influence in Republican-leaning areas. The political polarization of American Christianity reached a crescendo during the Trump presidency. Many evangelical leaders' enthusiastic support for a thrice-married former casino owner who paid hush money to an adult film actress struck many Americans as fundamentally hypocritical. For people already questioning their faith, the spectacle of religious leaders abandoning their stated moral principles for political power proved to be the final straw. Consider the story of Michael Rodriguez, a 45-year-old accountant from suburban Phoenix who was raised in an evangelical household and served as a church deacon for over a decade. When I watched my pastor explain away behavior he would have condemned from the pulpit if it came from anyone else, I realized that for him, politics had become more important than faith. That's when I knew I couldn't be part of it anymore. Michael's disillusionment reflects a broader trend. The politicization of American Christianity has driven away moderate believers who see faith as a personal spiritual matter rather than a political identity. Surveys show that Americans increasingly view evangelical Christianity not as a religious movement, but as a political faction. The decline of Christianity in America has created unexpected cultural consequences. The social safety net that churches once provided, community support, charitable aid, mental health resources, has weakened significantly. Many former church members speak of missing the sense of community and purpose that religious institutions provided, even as they reject the theological claims that undergirded them. This has led to the rise of what some scholars call secular churches, humanist congregations, ethical societies, and community groups that attempt to provide the social benefits of religious membership without the supernatural beliefs. Sunday Assembly, sometimes called Church for Atheists, has sprouted chapters across the country, offering inspirational talks, community service projects, and the kind of fellowship that churches once monopolized. The economic implications are staggering. American churches collectively control assets worth over $600 billion, employ millions of people, and operate thousands of schools, hospitals, and social service organizations. As membership and donations decline, many of these institutions face an uncertain future. In New England, where the decline has been most pronounced, hundreds of churches have been converted into apartments, restaurants, and even nightclubs. But perhaps most profoundly, Christianity's decline is reshaping American identity itself. For over 2 centuries, America understood itself as a Christian nation, even as it officially separated church and state. Biblical references permeated political discourse, Christian holidays anchored the calendar, and Christian moral frameworks influenced law and policy. As Christianity becomes a minority influence, America is grappling with fundamental questions. What does it mean to be American if we're no longer a Christian people? What values will unite us if not shared faith? Some religious leaders have responded to the crisis by doubling down on traditional teachings, insisting that the decline represents a test of faith that true believers must endure. Others have embraced radical reforms, ordaining women, accepting LGBTQ members, and revising traditional doctrines to align with contemporary values. But these responses often create new divisions, accelerating the exodus of members who feel their churches are either too rigid or have abandoned core principles. The most successful religious communities in contemporary America tend to be those that have found ways to maintain distinct spiritual identities while engaging constructively with modern culture. Mainline Protestant denominations like the Episcopal Church have managed to retain many members by embracing social justice causes and theological flexibility. even as they've lost influence and visibility in national discourse. Meanwhile, immigrant communities have injected new energy into American Christianity. Latino Catholics, Korean Presbyterians, and African Pentecostals have established vibrant congregations that combine traditional faith with contemporary cultural expressions. These communities often exhibit the kind of religious vitality that characterized American Christianity in previous generations, suggesting that the faith's decline may be more about cultural transformation than spiritual exhaustion. The rise of non-denominational Christianity represents another adaptation strategy. These churches, which eschew traditional denominational affiliations and focus on practical life guidance rather than theological doctrine, have attracted millions of Americans who find traditional Christianity off-putting but still crave spiritual community. Mega churches like Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church in Houston or Rick Warren's Saddleback Church in California offer Christianity late, inspirational messages with minimal theological content and maximum practical application. Yet, even these adaptations may not be enough to reverse the broader trend. The fundamental challenge facing American Christianity isn't just institutional or cultural, it's philosophical. In an era when scientific explanations for natural phenomena are readily available, when historical criticism has revealed the human fingerprints all over supposedly divine texts, and when global communication has exposed the vast diversity of human religious experience, maintaining exclusive truth claims becomes increasingly difficult. Dr. Linda Mercadante, who has studied religious knowns extensively, observes, "Many Americans haven't rejected Christianity because they hate it or because they've had bad experiences, though some have. They've rejected it because they've outgrown the need for the kind of certainty and authority that traditional religion provides. They're comfortable with ambiguity, with not having all the answers, with creating their own meaning. This comfort with uncertainty represents a fundamental shift in American consciousness. Previous generations turned to religion precisely because it offered certainty in an uncertain world. Clear answers to life's biggest questions, authoritative guidance on moral issues, and the promise of ultimate meaning and purpose. But for increasing numbers of Americans, that certainty feels false, that authority feels oppressive, and that meaning feels imposed rather than discovered. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated many of these trends. As churches closed their doors and moved services online, millions of Americans discovered they didn't miss them as much as they'd expected. The habit of weekly attendance, once broken, proved difficult to reestablish. Many people found they could maintain their spiritual lives such as they were, without institutional involvement. Paradoxically, the pandemic also revealed the continued power of religious community for those who remained committed. Churches that successfully adapted to digital formats often found their reach expanding, while those that struggled with technology saw their congregations further diminish. The crisis separated institutions that truly served their members' spiritual and emotional needs from those that had become mere social habits. As we look toward the future, several scenarios seem possible. The most likely is continued decline, with Christianity eventually becoming a minority religion in America, much as it has in many European countries. This doesn't necessarily mean the death of faith, but rather its privatization, religion becoming a personal matter rather than a public force. Alternatively, American Christianity might experience renewal through crisis, as challenging times often strengthen the commitment of remaining believers. Some scholars point to the vitality of Christianity in countries where it faces persecution or marginalization, as evidence that adversity can reinvigorate faith communities. A third possibility is transformation, the emergence of new forms of Christianity so different from traditional expressions that they might barely be recognizable as the same religion. These might emphasize experience over doctrine, community service over worship, and spiritual exploration over theological certainty. Whatever the future holds, the decline of Christianity in America represents more than a religious trend. It's a civilizational shift comparable to the fall of the Roman Empire or the Protestant Reformation. The institutions, values, and assumptions that have shaped American life for over 2 centuries are being fundamentally challenged and, in many cases, abandoned. For those who remain committed to Christian faith, this represents both crisis and opportunity. Crisis because the cultural supports that once made belief easy and natural have largely disappeared. Opportunity because faith that survives this winnowing process may prove more authentic and vital than the cultural Christianity it replaces. For American society as a whole, Christianity's decline poses profound questions about identity, values, and community that we're only beginning to grapple with. What will replace the churches as sources of meaning, morality, and social connection? How will we maintain social cohesion without shared religious frameworks? What new institutions will emerge to meet the human needs that religion once addressed? These questions don't have easy answers, but they demand our attention. The empty pews that dot America's landscape aren't just symbols of religious decline. They're symptoms of a broader search for meaning, community, and purpose that defines our age. Understanding why Christianity is declining in America isn't just about religion. It's about understanding who we are as a people and who we're becoming. The story of American Christianity's decline is still being written. Its final chapters remain unwritten, its ultimate consequences unknown. But one thing is certain: the America that emerges from this transformation will be fundamentally different from the one that preceded it, for better or worse. As we conclude this exploration into one of the most significant cultural shifts in American history, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through Professor Archive. The story of Christianity's decline in America touches every aspect of our society, from politics to education, from family life to national identity. It's a story that's still unfolding, with implications we're only beginning to understand. What do you think about this transformation? Are you witnessing these changes in your own community? Have you or someone you know been part of this shift away from traditional Christianity? I'm genuinely interested in your perspective, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to tell me what time you're watching this and which city you're tuning in from. I love seeing our global community come together to discuss these important topics. If this deep dive into American religious history fascinated you as much as it did me, you'll want to subscribe to Professor Archive and hit that notification bell. We explore the hidden currents that shape our world, from forgotten historical moments to contemporary transformations that are redefining human civilization. Every week, we uncover stories that help us understand not just where we've been, but where we're heading. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring the remarkable story of human civilization. This is Professor Archive, reminding you that the most important stories are often the ones unfolding right before our eyes.